to another episode of Expansive and Unscripted. Today, I am here with Sarah Ennor, who is an attorney who also happens to have ADHD, who is on a mission to make ADHD and neurodivergence more human. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Looking forward to the chat. I'm excited. It's unscripted, also a bit nervous, but really glad to be here. Thank you.
That's totally okay. It's normal to be nervous because, like, we don't know what's going to happen, which is some of the fun and some of the nerves, right? Of this space.
For the most part, I actually really prefer talking off the cuff. It's a little bit easier to not sound scripted, I find. So I'm glad that you're doing this because I think it's important to just have really casual conversations more often about these topics. So yeah, keep the nerves in check.
Yes. And I find, like, I don't know, every conversation that I've had so far, I just kind of like start with one question and then the conversation propels itself, which is often what I find in conversations with other neurodivergent folks, because we can just like meander around from topic to topic, which is exciting to me. And maybe like part of the point of this talk show is to just show like this is how neurodivergent people are and let's normalize it and make it a part of like how we understand communication, how we understand conversations. So
Well, I love you saying that because I have so many conversations where suddenly I'm 4 topics away in a whole different universe, and I'm like, I don't even know where I was going. There's like an Office, I can't remember what it is now, but from Michael Scott from The Office makes a comment like, sometimes I like to start a conversation and see where it goes. That's sort of every conversation I ever have, really. So it's nice when you can have those conversations and it's not really judged as a bad thing. And, why aren't you back on track over here? It's like, we're over here now and let's go.
Yeah, I feel like that's part of the function of like brains that find connection in all the things, because in our minds, like, well, it is connected, it's related, maybe several degrees out related, but still related somehow. And that's how we got there in the meandering.
Yeah, I started to see little posts. I'm assuming it's TikTok, one of those real situations that come up on the internet. And they called it dolphining. So, you're in a conversation and you just sort of duck below the surface and you swim like invisibly to another area and then you pop up and it's completely related to that. It's just, it's not maybe immediately apparent to the person you're talking to. And it reminded me of a conversation I had once with a friend where we were driving in cottage country, basically. And all of a sudden I started talking about something. And after that part of the conversation wrapped up, I said, you know what? That came up because about half an hour ago, we passed a red car on the side of the road that was for sale. And that's how I started talking about, I don't know, my car or red apples or whatever the heck the thing was. But it then propelled a whole conversation about the nature of conversation and original ideas and whether or not we actually have any, or if every single thing we ever utter is sort of connected to something that we've seen, whether it's recently or whenever. So yeah, that's a thing that sticks in my mind as normal. I don't know if everybody feels that way, but
I love that. I remember when I was really little, I had a sister, and sometimes we would like sleep over in each other's rooms and we would talk, and then we would pause and be like, how did we get here? Like, we started talking about space and now we're talking about this other thing. And I remember it was fun for me to do the trace back through topics and see like where the connections were. Like, that was exciting, like a fun puzzle or something, to be like, oh yeah, well, it makes sense because we did this and then we talked about that, which then like kind of like you said, like, oh, this whole train of thought was prompted by this particular thing, which I think is such a essential part of thought process and communication for so many neurodivergent folks. I think especially those with an ADHD component. which is, you know, like when that gets stifled and trying to be contained, I think that like we miss out on so many things, right? That's where some
Mhm.
of the innovation, some of the thinking outside the box, some of the creativity comes from, is the ways that our brains make these wild connections that maybe other folks wouldn't.
Well, and it's funny because I asked you about the comments. So I see them. I see my friend Kyle here commented that he finds it uncomfortable in networking situations. Because I was going to say,
Mm,
do you find as an adult now that it's almost stressful that happens? Because I feel similar to Kyle, I'm sure, where you're in a conversation, or maybe it's not even networking, but say I'm trying to share something about a legal issue in a meeting, right? And I start talking about it, and then I do see all those connections. I sort of meander off, but then I feel this pressure, like I have to get all the things I was going to say about this particular thing out in this meeting.
mhm,
And so while like it's to your point, you said stifled, but it can also just be the pressure we put on ourselves. We're like, okay, I'm going all over the place here and totally relevant. And it's very interesting. And, this is going to be amazing, but I have to make sure I get back to this. And so I'm sort of
mhm.
multitasking in my thinking the whole time about needing to get back over here. And then when I lose, because that often happens. I actually said this to my husband just last night. I said, I swear to God, this relates to this thing we were just talking about. But yeah, it's pressure, right? Because people are like, why
Yeah.
are you off on this tangent and can't you keep a straight train of thought? I'm like, it's very, very uh connected. It might not be direct or straight.
Mhm,
But that's something I've been learning about my relationship with time as well, and goals and all of that stuff, is that they aren't straight. Um,
mhm.
anyway, I could keep going here, but there was
Yeah.
someone posted about a book on the nature of time for folks with ADHD and
Mm,
autism, and the two uh, analogies, I guess. One was a spiral staircase, right? So
mm,
you know what the steps are in front of you, but as it spirals down, you can't really see the end of it, right? And so
mm.
you know that you're headed somewhere, but you're not 100% sure where you're headed, but you sort of know that it's down. So, there's a little bit of um, a mix of knowing and not knowing. And then
Yeah.
the other one was I don't know if it was an oval exactly or an ellipse, but the idea that you sort of maybe go slowly around the corners and recover in those moments and then slingshot down the side of it when the time, oh, okay. um, yeah, and then slingshot down the side going quickly at times, but that
Mm.
the sort of ebb and flow of the speed as well as the corners. So like where is the actual goal in that time? Um,
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Time is definitely an interesting notion
Mhm.
for me and many other folks. And I find like time and energy are so closely linked. Like when somebody will ask me like, "Well, how long do you think it's going to take for you to do XYZ?" One day it might take me 20 minutes. Another day it might take me 2 hours,
Mhm.
depending on like the energy that I have, how focused I am,
Yeah.
where my like momentum is. Um so yeah, that can also be a challenge, like learning how to fit into the constructs of like mainstream expectations, right? And kind of going back to the meandering thoughts. I think one of this just happened. One of the things that like you were talking about, sometimes we lose track of our own selves in that. And I think about, like we're holding some threads, and sometimes we like a thread slips out of our hands and we're like, wait, what? Like I know that this was connected. What was the connection? And it takes a minute to like reconnect to why that thing was relevant.
Mhm.
Um, and you asked about in spaces how those experiences are for me. And I think one of the things I've been working on since being identified several years ago is accommodating myself in that. And so
Mhm.
giving myself permission to do that exploration. And sometimes even in the midst of the conversation, I might say like, I know this isn't exactly what you asked, but it's connected. Like I'm getting there.
Yeah.
So just as I give a heads up to people, or sometimes the answer that comes out, um, I will sometimes say like, I don't know if that actually answered your question, but that is what my brain came up with,
Yeah.
as just a way to kind of normalize a little bit more of these different ways of thinking and connecting with things.
Yeah, the first example really takes a lot of self-awareness. So good for you for realizing it, right? To be able to point it out to folks. I also wonder though, what is the nature not only of time, but what is the nature of conversation? What is the purpose, right? Like,
Mhm.
is the purpose to get to the point? Because I feel often that I feel that pressure. Um, and it's self-imposed in some ways because I'm quite an analytical person. And so I do want to get to it eventually. But as an example, say like right now we have what, like 30 minutes or so to talk, right? And if I started off with the first thing we said, which I don't even remember what it was now, and I was still thinking I've got to get back and finish the pieces
Mhm.
of that thing, and we've only got this much time, like, is the conversation as helpful and meaningful? Is that thing
Mhm.
even important? Why am I so focused on it? Why am I not present in the existing conversation that we're having because I'm worrying I've got to get back to this other thing? And in the grand scheme of sort of friendships and relationships and things like that, I just think the whole world has gotten away from the idea that we can just be. I read a whole article about
Mhm.
hanging out the other day, and people don't really do that anymore. They've got to have a reason and a purpose and a place they're going and a thing
Mhm.
they're doing. And I miss that. I miss just I thought maybe I just thought that was high school, right? I got to hang out with my friends in their basements, and that was
Mhm.
what the entertainment was, or in a coffee shop or something. And now it feels like there's got to be a plan, which adds pressure to having to organize ourselves and decide on times and reservations and other things like that. Um, but I'm a big fan of just kind of going with the flow. But I have a lot to say all the time. And so I also am a big fan of cramming every possible thing into every conversation. So I don't know. I am an enigma to myself, Jennifer.
I mean, who among us is not?
Right?
I think it's interesting, one, like the two descriptors you used for navigating time, like a spiral and an ellipsis, because I so many conversations that I have with other neurodivergent folks, it's just kind of the standard, like, yeah, what is time? Like we
Mm,
blink and it's 3 months later, and it's like, what? No, like we just had that conversation, or I just sent that email. Um, but I also think about how so many of us don't necessarily think linearly.
mhm,
There's Mm, like I've had conversations with folks and I'm like, I feel like I'm simultaneously straddling 5 different dimensions right now. And so there's a lot that's happening like on this dot of a linear spectrum that can't be like described or explained or understood in a linear context, but like all of these things are happening concurrently, which I know can sound a lot of different ways to people who don't have those kind of experiences or don't think or operate that way. It's something that I think sometimes we run into when I'm curious if you have this experience around problem solving. Like sometimes I'm talking to folks and they're not understanding the solution I'm offering, and recently somebody said, "Jen, you come up with solutions to problems people haven't yet realized are the problem."
correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
This
you have
is
this experience too.
yes. Yeah, and, uh, I think just going back to the part about the, multidimensional experience that you have, I think the interesting thing to me has been to see how many different ways people have come up with to explain their experience, because I would certainly tell you, I now know, I did not know this before, but I now know there are a million thoughts in my head all at once. But when I was first thinking about whether I should get diagnosed, I would see a TikTok video and the person would come down the stairs, and the video was them sort of talking 5 different people over top of each other on different topics. Like, I don't experience it that way, right? I don't experience voices. But what I do experience is at any moment, I could point at anything in the room and tell you what I was thinking about that thing. And I was thinking about this up. Is it still warm? I was thinking about that door's open. I wonder if anybody can see it through my camera, whatever it is. And they're all just there.
Yes.
But I don't see it. I've not thought about it as multidimensional or anything like that. But I do think the linear comment is very relevant for me. And I think about that a lot in terms of goals. I was on a call with a coach yesterday, actually, and she said, "What are your goals for our time together?" And I said, "Well, first of all, I'll just let you know I abhor goals in every way. I don't make them. I don't know what the future holds. I cannot even see the future or think about the future, so I don't know what you're asking. What is this conversation?" And
I love that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also a bit of a defiant resistance to goals, because I operate at my best, I'm realizing, and this is the first time I'm saying this out loud, but I operate at my best with complete chaos, right? I operate well when I am forced to find a way through mess. I operate well when I'm not overthinking what the process needs to be and how, like, what the goal is at the end of the day sometimes. Anyway, the conversation ended up with a whole lot of insights for her and for me. And, I kind of came up with a goal, I guess. But yeah, it's fascinating that you say that. And then just on the concept of problem solving, it kind of relates to time too, because yes, I see the things before the people see the things, because I've made the connections between a million different pieces, and people may not have recognized that it's a problem yet, or they may not ever think it's a problem. But the other thing that relates to time is that part of just getting there first. So it's not always, or getting somewhere first. Like, I'm not going to lie, it's not always the right solution, right? Sometimes I have an idea, and all of these ideas have seemingly created a pattern that I have identified and solved the problem. And then a few people push back and ask questions, and you realize, oh yes, I missed that one little piece in the 7,000 that were in my brain right now. Or, I wasn't patient enough to wait to learn that piece, or whatever. And so there's many a time I've been on a phone call, for example, when I was working in-house as a lawyer, and I'd call up external counsel and say, "I think I have the answer to this thing. Like, these are all the facts. This is what I believe the legislation says. And I think this is the answer, right?" And they would sort of come back and say, "Okay, stop pressuring me. I don't think that way. I have to hear your facts, process them, think about the legislation. Like, you've already thought about this for an hour, and I am just starting the analysis. And I'm a lawyer, so I'm paranoid that I'm going to get the wrong answer if I just throw something out right now, where I just figure everything can be corrected." I had someone say to me the other day, and I loved it, and I'm going to use it over and over again, that she, being very self-aware, says things like, "This is not a polished thought." And when they say that, people understand this is not a final version. Because I'm realizing that people that do think before they speak sometimes actually have resolved something, and it is a final thought. And then when they share it, it's kind of not up for debate. Where I don't have that. Everything's always up for debate with me. I will change my mind as long as you can persuade me. I'm not just going to change my mind if you want me to. But with logic, I can get anywhere, really.
And that's such an important thing to know about yourself, and for people to know about themselves, in terms of, in relationship or in the workplace, having, like I describe it, some people have like microwave thought process where it's like fast and it goes, and then like what they say is a finished complete thought. Some people have crock pot brains. I have a crock pot brain. Like I need to put it in there, let it simmer. Sometimes I have an external process where I want to talk through it with someone, but sometimes it's a more internal process and I want to think through things before I start talking with folks. But yeah, you're right. It's important to be able to say, or to be able to know, like the difference between, hey, I'm open to sorting through this together, and we may come to a different conclusion than I thought, or this is where I stand on this.
Yeah.
Right? Those are two different things. And I think if we're not able to identify that about ourselves, that's where a lot of miscommunication can come from. If someone's thinking like, cool, this is open for debate, and someone's like, no, this is where I stand.
Yeah.
This is
Well,
forever ride.
I think that's exactly right. I also think it takes a heck of a lot of reflection and self-awareness to get there. Because when you say, I could just say to somebody, this is a thought I'm having right now, but I'm open to your thought. Like that's not, how many words that takes? If I'm in a rush to get to the answer, I was like, I don't have time. I'm just diving in with my thought. But I think what I've been learning, particularly in relationship, as you call it, is that when two people have totally different ways of thinking and they haven't turned their mind to the fact that the other person has a different way, or if they're experiencing trauma, for example, and so they're kind of mired into their own way of thinking and thinking that it means something, it is really tough to resolve things. And so I've taken to just telling people, and this happened a lot since learning I have ADHD. I've had to explain my time management, and then I say it out loud that, I need to have for lack of a better word, a good reason to be somewhere on time. And then, it comes out of my mouth and I think, I realize that actually just sounded like I don't think you're a good enough reason to be on time. And that is not at all what I mean. Like, I need you to understand it is like a physical inability. It's a misunderstanding of the nature of time. All I need is one message to pop up when I'm close enough to my computer to see it right before I'm about to leave. And being 15 minutes early turns into being 15 minutes late. And completely forgetting I'm even supposed to be somewhere. I've missed calls and meetings where I'm like, I literally just sat here surfing on LinkedIn because I forgot that I was supposed to be on your phone call. It's not good. But this is kind of why I think a lot of people won't talk about their condition, because they realize there's a social norm that we're supposed to remember everything and be on time for things. And it shows some horrifying level of disrespect if I don't respect your time. And I just wish that people could understand it has absolutely nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with time does not exist in your way in my mind, right?
Absolutely. And I think about how that shows up like culturally too. There are many cultures around the world that don't abide by ticking clocks as they're moving through their days. And you mentioned something like, so the assumption that this person disrespects me because they're late or because they missed something. I think that's one of the biggest things that I struggle with is assumptions that people make about other people's behavior. Like, you just came up with that. Like, you didn't ask, the person didn't ask me like, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? Is something happening? Right? There's just a flat out assumption. This person doesn't respect my time.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I'm working on, like breaking down is, can we please opt for curiosity over making assumptions about a person's tone, a person's actions, behaviors? Like, can we opt for checking in and being curious about, like, hey, how are you doing? Or what's going on? Or, hey, something you said to me the other day, it just kind of like rubbed me wrong, and it doesn't seem like something that you would say. So I just want to check in about that. Maybe I misunderstood or misheard, right?
Yeah.
Curiosity can afford so much more insight. And I also think it's part of this, like when you were going back, when you were talking about like, is the point of conversation to like get to a specific goal, or is the conversation the goal? And I think a lot about I'm a very process oriented person and value process.
Okay,
It
cool.
sounds like that's
Share
different
home.
from you.
Just don't force it on
Um,
me. Good.
but but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who are not, either don't necessarily value the process or are more interested in like, let's just get to the outcome,
Mhm.
or let's just get to the final destination.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's, I mean, it's interesting because I will spend time in the process and, you know, like stretch that out in order to explore all the things. And, you know, you made this sign. So now I'm curious to hear your thoughts about process.
Yeah, well, and I think just adding to that process concept, there are people who don't like the process and just want to get to the outcome. And there are people who love the process. And then there are people in the middle who like the process but don't need it to be belabored, or who
Mm.
like elements of the process but would really think it's impractical to go through every single step at a given moment, right? Um, my process, as I said, is kind of chaos, right? So if I mean, I'm not saying it's a good process at all, right? If I need to get something done, I go on my computer to do the thing, and every thought that pops into my head takes me somewhere else. And that's why I have 7,000 tabs open so that I can come back and be like, oh yeah, don't forget to do that thing I was in the middle of an hour ago.
Mhm.
And then there's the hyper focus that can kick in when the conditions of my interest-based nervous system have been met, right? And all of a sudden, oh, this thing, like if it's not done in the next 30 minutes, I'm not going to have a thing to say on this call I'm supposed to go on and
Mhm.
pitch my services, say, or, explain the law to somebody because I haven't finished doing it. So, okay, now I'm really focused on it, and nothing could possibly distract me because I realize this needs to get done.
Mm.
It's pretty, like, I can get focused and efficient. It's pretty rare that I can't be distracted. I almost liken it to the light sleeper. Like, I am a light sleeper
Mm.
also, but I'm a light focuser, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
I can be very easily awakened from my focus. And it's not, I've heard you describe before sort of a disappointment with that happening when you're in your sort of very focused mode, and that
Mhm.
it's frustrating. And then the time it takes to get back to it. Um, I almost, I've used the word oblivious about myself a few times in the last few days. I feel that I am a little bit oblivious when it comes to really digging into, I'm going to say something that feels like an opposite thing and that I'm not supposed to say, but I on the one hand don't dig into a result, and on the other hand, going back, so for example, if someone interrupts me, I might be annoyed in that moment and snip. But now it's like the Ted Lasso goldfish analogy. Like, I just 2 minutes later, someone's like, "Why are you so mad at me?" And I'm like, "I'm not. What do you mean?" It's like, "Oh, well, you just screamed at me." I'm like, "Well, but I'm over it, right?"
Sure.
Not everybody kind of has that happen.
Mhm.
But then going on the opposite end of it, going back to your comment about people and curiosity, and we've dug into that conversation many times in our private conversations. Um, I am also a person who would describe myself as having been very rigid in my viewpoints in the past, and it's not, I'm not fixed, for lack of a better word. I am more aware of it, and I try
Mhm.
very hard not to dig in, and certainly on topics where it's already, the penny has dropped and I realize, okay, this is a place where I need to not hold those assumptions. I'm good, but there are still lots of places where, I mean, when I was working full-time in a very political organization. I spent a lot of time in my colleagues' offices complaining about everybody else's behavior and how they were so insulting and not doing the right thing and, all of that. And so I think it's so important to acknowledge the process of, not the process, not the journey-like process of growing as humans, right? And that curiosity is something I also am sharing in every talk I do, trying to make ask, listen, believe go viral. I keep telling people, making it a hashtag. But I think I'm almost more credible because I have been so opposite to that a lot of my life. I've held all the same stereotypes about ADHD until I realized what it really was. I've believed that people who don't say anything in a meeting don't have a thought in their head because they're not contributing when in fact they're just processing behind the scenes. All of those things that we judge about others, I have absolutely done myself. And I still probably do in certain circumstances. And sometimes just with certain people, I'm starting to notice, like some of my closest friends, I have an expectation that they should know me better. I'm still making judgments about things that they do because they should know. And yet I never would have made a choice, even though I should have known to do X for certain things. So, yeah. Wow, that was all over the place, but very deep and insightful about me. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate your candor because yes, same, me too. Like we make assumptions or impose meaning because that's what we're taught to, right? Like we see these kind of stock interactions show up in TV shows, in media, in various things that are portrayed all around us. Like we didn't just all independently come up with this. Like we are socialized by rule of when someone is late, they're disrespecting your time, right? Like taught me that. I didn't just come up with that on my own. So I appreciate you shedding light on that process. And I want to explore this a little bit more with you about, like where I am now is not where I was 3 years ago before I knew about my autistic ADHD. There was a lot of things that I thought and believed and felt differently about this. I've done a lot of work in the last several years to like deconstruct belief systems and, ableist ways of thinking and assumptions that I've made about people to arrive at this place. And so I want to explore with you. You have talked about before, like working with people just at the very beginning of learning about neuroinclusion, and kind of how you're introducing some of these things to the companies and the organizations that you're speaking with. And so, yeah, I'd love for you to share a little bit about like what do those first steps look like as you're working with folks.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing for me and first of all, I'll say, I feel like a little baby Bambi who's just like trying to take its first steps. And I feel as a human being as though I have evolved so drastically in less than one short year, right? My diagnosis happened in March of last year. And I'm noticing it also happening in my business. So where I started off thinking, here are all the things I'm going to teach folks about neuroinclusion, and I'm going to talk about how it impacts performance assessments and reviews and how we interact with each other. All those things are still relevant. But what I've started to realize as I talk to folks and learn that nobody has started this work, like nobody, I can't believe, like I did a talk the other day and I said, how many people in your organization can say that you started a conversation about neuroinclusion at all? And there was one person out of 20 different places, right? Zero conversation. And it so happened that was also on ADHD, which is also uncommon. Usually it's autism first because it's just a bit more well known at this stage. And so taking that into account, what I realized is when you get some pushback about doing this work because I don't know, we need to create a whole strategy around neuroinclusion and we want to make sure we have all the steps in place before we get started. or we're concerned that if we talk about it too soon when we're not ready to accommodate it yet, we're not going to be ready. And so what I'm trying to encourage folks to think about is, we didn't know when we started talking about anti-Black racism that, like, we didn't say we need to know every single thing about colonialism and Black people and like how their experience has been before we can start to say a thing. Like, we'll just continue on with slavery for now, and like we'll get back to that later, right? You started saying, let's take a step, right? And I think that's where I am right now with folks, and that's why my message and my sort of taglines have sort of adjusted to be much more the human element of it, because until you even understand why you need to do something, you don't know what to do, right? You know that I come across, if you've ever known me at work, as a very bold, confident sounding person who has it all together and, you know, has been promoted and has wonderful titles and does great work, but is just, you know, too much in the workplace and doesn't do any of these other things that we value as sort of a political positive thing. But you haven't been curious about me, right? You asked me actually in your form, this is the one thing I remember about your form, is you said, is there anything you wish anybody would ask you sometimes? And my answer, I think, was something to the effect of like, are you okay, right?
Yeah.
Because in a lot of circumstances, whether it's coaching sport or at work, like sometimes I'm just talking in this tone of voice because it's my natural voice. Sometimes I'm talking in this tone of voice because it gives me dopamine and that makes me feel excited and awake in a conversation. Sometimes I'm talking in a tone of voice because I'm upset and angry and or something's going on behind the scenes. But when you come across as a very confident person and a woman doing that, people don't expect it. First of all, they think, you know, you must have it very much together if you're willing to stand up and talk as though you have it together. But they don't necessarily say, like, as you described with the curiosity question, you know, you said the thing. Like, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're not a complete jackass. I'm curious if did I do something? You know, are you okay? Is something going on with you? Because first of all, taking the pause and asking the question is going to make me pause and reflect. So I said, I sometimes need to reflect again. I might forget to be self-aware. I can be very self-aware when I want to be, and I always want to be, but I don't always remember to be. And so that's kind of where I'm trying to take these very early conversations is, please don't make your first step have to be the perfect step. I promise you, I'm not going to judge you because you didn't know every single thing you were supposed to know about ADHD before I got there. Like, you're having me in because you don't know, and thank you for that. And when you have a fear that, you know, well, we need to protect ourselves from, like, if we tell people too much and they realize that this is something they're entitled to, we have to worry about that. I just keep going back to this idea that, especially with lawyers, and I'm not trying to say it's only lawyers who've had this conversation with me, but we tend to think that the risk-free version of something is, we know the right thing and we do the right thing and we organize ourselves and we prepare and we have the right contracts and the right provisions and we limit our liability and do all this stuff, right? But what I've learned, separate from my speaking work, like I started to learn this in my business as a lawyer, as a sole practitioner, the biggest risk mitigation tactic we have at our disposal is to make people feel seen and heard and respected. So if you talk about this thing and people feel like, oh my gosh, this may be me, they understand this is not a taboo topic that we shouldn't be talking about in the workplace. They understand there's people here that feel the way I feel. Maybe I feel a tiny bit more safe now to say something. Oh, I'll ask for an accommodation. I don't know what it is. It's anything. Can I work from home? And they say no. Maybe my response is not, oh my God, I'm going to report you to the Human Rights Tribunal. You're not making a reasonable accommodation. Maybe the response is, I know you're trying and you don't know how important this would be to me. Let me try again later. Let me see if I can come up myself with a different, lower threshold that you might still be able to support me with through accommodation. We know that all these accommodations are, like, not all, but vast majority of these things are simple, free things. They're not always easy because you have to turn your mind to how this simple thing is really going to be a help, or why the simple thing should be, because people get uppity about equality, but that if we can get people to just start taking the first step, like, there's a book, I forget what it's called entirely, but I used to have a picture of it on the backdrop on my computer. Like, can you see the first step? Just take that. For someone who's feeling overwhelmed, it was a horse trying to cross a river or something. I don't know. And I think that is just so important to keep in mind and to think about, is like, we don't have to get it perfect. We just need to start, because we can all sit there. And we've learned this in business. Like, we've been in similar coaching programs and things and thought, I don't know, my website doesn't look right, my offer isn't perfect, the price isn't yet, I don't know. Like, no, like, tell your friends and family what you do for one thing, right? Like, don't be a chancellor. Don't sit there with everybody like, what does he do after 18 years? Tell people and ask them to support you, and ask them to share your message, and ask them just to like your posts if that's how you're marketing, right? So the same goes for everything, I'm starting to realize. And I have clung to perfection, and I still sometimes forget and do that anyway. I feel like I've just really talked a lot there, but you might want to add something there. Look how self-aware I'm being. Comment on that? Yeah.
I love it. Well, and there's so much to unpack, and perfectionism is one of those things. I think for many late identified folks, we have like, it's been reflected back to me, like, oh, you're such a perfectionist. And in my mind, I think, like, I know that I will never reach perfection. I am not striving for that knowingly.
Yeah.
But what I realized it is that the reflections that I've been given, that I'm lazy, or I'm not living up to my potential, those kinds of things, I'm working extra hard to try to just, like, make that minimum of what's expected of me, that then, compared to others, is like an extraordinary degree of investment in things or whatever. And so unpacking this idea of, like, things have to be perfect has been a huge part of, like, accepting all the differences about myself, that I'm not going to be able to show up for all my meetings some weeks, and I'm going to have to reschedule, and that's, like, imperfect, or maybe some people see that as unprofessional, but it's also part of modeling and building new ways of being, right? It's like, we got to start somewhere. I love your like, just take the first step. And so, kind of making space for imperfection, and making space for, it's safe to make mistakes here. You're not going to be judged. You're not going to be shamed. Like, try it. And, you might totally miss the mark. And also, that's okay. Try it again. Those are the things, like, I appreciate Monica's comment about psychological safety. Those are the things that contribute to building psychologically safe spaces.
I just have a thought on psychological safety that came to me in this moment, because it was related to your comment about, you're not going to be judged, you're not going to be shamed, right? Because and then thinking about, what does psychological safety look like? And to me, it looks like the way you interact with me, right? You are so calm and understanding and curious when you speak with me. And yet, I am not trying to shame anybody or judge anybody when I am talking in my own way, right? And so the thought that came to me about the psychological safety, and I'm all on board with the idea that people need to feel safe in order to share their stuff, but it also raises the issue that maybe we own a little bit of the development of our own psychological safety too, because if we expect people to deliver it to us, that means we have taken our own curiosity off the table. Like, I'm not now thinking, is Sarah talking in this angry tone at me because she's a jerk, or is that her way? And maybe she's not trying to intimidate me and tell me that I'm wrong. Maybe she's just sharing in her own way, right? And I can feel safe. And in fact, maybe she's one of the safest people here. Because, like, honestly, I feel like I am not a very judgy person when it comes to difference, as long as I said, as I can understand it, right? And so one of the, I was doing this little 2 things can be true thing on YouTube, that it was gonna maybe be a series, and of course series don't really, like, I don't stick to those very well, so I've done like 3. But I was talking about the fact that it can be very true that I am not leaving space for people in meetings, but also that I am, but you have to ask for it. Because for me, that's how space occurs. I am off to the races with all the ideas and spitting them out. And if you're prepared to sit there and just listen to it, I'm prepared to talk. If you give me the option to talk about myself instead of some other topic, absolutely, that's what I want to do. And away we go, right? And then people are like, oh, it's all about Sarah, and why is she always so aggressive and ambitious and this and the other? And I think the space was there for you to take anytime you wanted to just say, can I just add something there? Can I interrupt? Like, I'm not going to be offended. I told you I have a goldfish mentality when it comes to offense. I may very briefly get upset by things and then move on most of the time. Same thing if you interrupt me. I'm not offended. Other people might be offended. So I have to be aware of that as well. But that learning process and that ebb and flow between the two is something that I had not considered with the lens of psychological safety specifically before. But I think I now will be saying that to people in my talks.
Yeah. And this is a lot, right? Like there's so much here, which is part of why I appreciate your messaging around, like, just take the first step. Nobody has to have their like PhD in neuroinclusion to begin.
Right.
Right.
And like, also you need to what I'm also realizing, where I always think I can just logic people to death. Like, no, but these are the actual facts of the thing. Like, this is the answer, because there is no possible other answer that, we should treat people with ADHD like they're invalids, or they're disabled in a way that they can't, or that they need to be fixed, or that they need to be, whatever. But we need to meet people where they are. And the more I realize that, and it has not ever been something I've been good at all. But if we can't say, listen, I'm going to hear what you have to say, and you're going to say something I completely disagree with, I'm going to be a bit gentle and explain how I think we could look at this differently. And I am also not good at that, but I'm practicing it, because I'm starting to realize how important it is that if someone comes to me and says, well, everyone has a little ADHD, that I don't just rip them apart about, like, I don't think you understand exactly what this is. Because when you do that and you invalidate whatever they've learned about ADHD, we know that the symptoms are all just human symptoms that every single person on earth experiences at one time or another. Do they experience it every minute of their day? Probably not. Do they know yet? And that's one of the things I teach as well, is, what makes it actually rise to the level of a condition, rather than just being all those human symptoms that you hear about in the news. But if we just said, you don't know what you're talking about, this is like, I'm the only one that knows, no one's receiving that, right? Yeah. And I've spent my whole life thinking they would, trying harder, pushing stronger, right? And it's just been such an eye-opening journey in the last year. Part of it too, I'll say, is related to the connections that I've made in so many different areas, whether it's business coaching, whether it's through some of these lives, the neuroinclusion community, the disability community, the mental health community, the legal community, who's actually starting, those people who are willing to be authentic on LinkedIn, for example, are starting to talk about these issues much more, which is so great. And I feel that the bigger impact I can make right now, instead of trying to logic people to death into the reason why this is the way to be, is to say, you know what, I'm brave enough to tell you the most embarrassing stories about my life. And like I posted about this the other day. I said, so I started off a talk by saying, like, listen to the things I say here about my life and tell me which ones are taboo. I went on for like 3 pages worth of like bullet points. And they just turned and looked at me like, everything? Like, you can't say that. If you say that at work, people are going to think you can't do your job. And to your point about there's so much, like I've had people say, you know, thank you for sharing this information about yourself. It really helps me to understand your condition. Also, it makes me wonder how on earth you could ever be an attorney. Like, well, thank you for asking. That was a 1 minute short. There is just no way I could have explained all the reasons why, you know, there was nothing else going on that day. So I didn't have to be focused in that moment. And when I take my medication 30 minutes later, I'm going to be much more combobulated than I am right now. And, you know, I am able to focus when it's urgent and important. And I do have a sense of justice and obligation. So if someone's asked me to do something, I'm going to feel committed to it. And so, you know, those snippets that we see, we also need people to know that they're in a vacuum. And even in my talks, like I'm going in here, I have an hour, I'm trying to cram as much as I can humanly cram into it. And then I'm leaving thinking, wait a second, I think I'm doing too much. I think I need to simplify this because people can't absorb that much at once, right? We need to get them interested enough to know that they don't know what they don't know. And then we need to, God willing, be invited back time and time again to speak to these organizations and help them along their journey and introduce them to, you know, other people and with different experience so that they can see that, yes, this is my experience. In a lot of ways, I feel that I've gotten off, I don't like to say lightly exactly, but my spiky profile is very different than other people's. My biggest thing is time management and the hyperactivity, like the inability to stop talking or stop my mind from racing or whatever that is. And other people have very different experiences of that. And I could just say "and" over and over at the end of every sentence. But, you know, like my relationship, for example, with time, I describe it now as not existing because I learned that it was ableist of me to say time blindness potentially. Maybe it's insulting to folks who have vision loss. And so I'm trying to move in that direction, but my relationship does not really exist. That's why we're probably almost over time here, and I'm still saying "and." But that is and I'm not really all that bothered by it. Like I am bothered and I will apologize if I'm late for something, or I will thank someone better yet for their patience with my lateness. But other folks, you know, I would comment, for example, during a talk in these like comments and say, you know, we're great. And I have no problem with being different. And people say, well, it's absolutely debilitating to me. Like I cannot function this way. And I think, again, even people with my own condition are on their own journey. What is their relationship to experiencing? What is their relationship to the environment they're in? Can they be late and not have much of a consequence? Do they have people backing them up when that happens? Like, I don't want anybody backing me up when that happens because I'll just do it again, right? I want to be left flailing in the wind when I'm late for something or I miss a timeline, because that is one way that I'm going to develop my own innate sense of urgency for those things. And if I know there's a consequence and I'm like, it's urgent now. It's not urgent 5 minutes after it was supposed to happen. It's urgent now, right? So anyway, blah, blah.
Yeah. I love all this. And yes, we do have to wrap up because there are other things that are happening. But this has been such an exciting conversation. And you've given me a lot of things that I'm going to put in my cognitive crock pot and simmer on. What I want to ask from you before we go, do you have any projects or special events that are coming up that you want people to know about?
Really, I'm just still plugging away at building my business and working with organizations or law firms on helping them take that first step, helping them see what a human lawyer with ADHD can look like, and what, if I was totally honest, I might have needed when I was working in an employment circumstance. So yeah, talks, hour, 90 minutes, half day, full day, series of talks over a period of months. That's really my core offering. And a big part of that is making sure as I build my new business, that I'm doing it in a way that doesn't overwhelm me every day. So I'm trying to keep it simple. I'm going to tell you, that was my goal for my coaching. Success is going to come from simplicity. So I'm going to try to stop using so many words, and I'm going to try to, oh my gosh, I'm going to do that this time, but you know what I mean? Yeah, talks are what I'm selling. I do have a small add-on for folks who might see themselves in my story to purchase an hour with me of just peer support. It's really, what is your experience? Do you need to be heard? Do you have questions about how I navigated something? So I'm available to folks. And again, just to manage my energy, that does cost something, but it's available for purchase on my website. And if it's out of budget, folks can contact me. But that's about it. Otherwise, I'm just trying to get visible on LinkedIn. So anybody who wants to find me there and connect, I would be grateful for that. Anybody who wants to share my work, if they find it interesting, I'd be grateful for that as well. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time and the energy to share this conversation. I've loved talking with you, and we're probably going to do it again sometime down the road.
I was going to say, we can obviously go on forever. So if ever you have a emergency opening, I thrive under pressure. So you just give me a call, and if I can help you, I will come right back and we'll talk again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye.